Hi everyone, welcome to Random Thoughts with Alex. In this video I'm going to discuss my top 10 of Hugo Award winning science fiction novels. This is somewhat different from my usual videos. Usually I talk about science, but this time I'm going to talk about science fiction. And the reason is because of a video I saw from the channel Fantasy for the Ages. And in this video Jim, who's one of the presenters, presented his top 10 of Hugo Award winning novels. And I made a comment to his channel that I've read a lot of these novels that won the Hugo Award. Maybe I should make my own top 10. And Jim encouraged me to do so. So there it is. Here's my top 10 of Hugo winning novels. So let's start with number 10. On number 10, I have Werner Vinge with the novel A Deepness in the Sky, which won the award in 2000. Now, this novel is part of a series along with A Fire Upon the Deep and Children of the Sky. I've read A Fire Upon the Deep as well, which also won the Hugo Award, but I prefer A Deepness in the Sky. Unlike most people like A Fire Upon the Deep better. So what's the book about? It's a book about a star, which is called the on-off star, which flares up every 250 years, produces light and energy for 35 years, and then goes dormant for 210 years, and then every 250 years this cycle repeats. On the planet that surrounds this star, there is a civilization of spider-like creatures that are technologically somewhere in the Industrial Revolution. So they're somewhat behind humanity, but not by much. And a group of people is sent out to check this out and observe from a distance what's happening on this planet. So this book is quite interesting because it follows the intrigues within the human population as well as the links with the spider population. Jim does not have this book in his top 10, but he has it on his to read list, along with A Fire Upon the Deep. What makes Werner Vinge an interesting character is that he is not just a science fiction author, but also a futurist. He was one of the first people to ever talk about the technological singularity, the idea that our technology is going to develop so fast with the development of artificial intelligence that eventually the evolution is going to go vertical, which would be a singularity mathematically. And so that's a concept that he kind of pioneered. I think that was in the 1980s. I'm not exactly sure. Another interesting fact is that Werner Vinge was married to Joan Vinge, um, and Joan Vinge is also a Hugo Award-winning author. She won the Hugo Award in 1981 with The Snow Queen. I've read The Snow Queen. It's not in my top 10, but it's definitely an interesting novel in its own right. So, number 9. On number 9, I have Connie Willis with the book To Say Nothing of the Dog. This book won the Hugo Award in 1999, so 1 year before Werner Vinge won with A Deepness in the Sky. The title, To Say Nothing of the Dog, refers to a book by Jerome K. Jerome, Three Men in a Boat, which has as a secondary title, To Say Nothing of the Dog. If you haven't read this book by Jerome K. Jerome, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you want to read this book, because there are some links between the two. And both books are actually incredibly funny. Jerome K. Jerome is one of the funniest authors that I'm aware of. And Connie Willis can be very funny in this book as well. This book is part of a series which began with the Doomsday Book, which also won a Hugo Award. But to say nothing of the dog is the only book by Connie Willis that I have read, so I can only judge just this one. I definitely should check out some of these other books. So, what is this book about? It's a time travel book, which is set in the year 2057 as the present time, and then people who are working at a university are traveling back to 1940 to do research on the Coventry Cathedral in order to be able to rebuild it in the exact original form uh, as it was before the cathedral was destroyed during the Second World War. There's also time travel happening to 1888, which is around the time when Jerome K. Jerome wrote the book Three Men in a Boat, to resolve problems with time travels that were arising. I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want to know more detail, you should read the book. Now, Jim does not have this book in his top 10, nor does he have any of the other books by Connie Willis on his list, but he has some of Connie Willis's books on his to read list. I would definitely recommend reading this one as well because I think it's a very interesting book and a very funny book. On number 8 of my top 10, I have J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I don't need to introduce Harry Potter or J.K. Rowling. I think everybody knows about them. This is the only book, as far as I'm aware, in the Harry Potter series that won a Hugo Award. I think one or two other books were shortlisted for the Hugo Award but didn't win. This is the fourth book in the series. In this book, Harry Potter is drawn into a very dangerous contest that he has to participate in and that he has to win, and he needs all of his wits to get through this contest. And of course, it's related to Voldemort because the book advances the overall plot of the series. This book is at number 3 in Jim's top 10, so considering that he has read fewer books than I have and from the Hugo Awards lists, I think that's fairly consistent with my ranking. On number 7, I have Neil Gaiman with American Gods. This book won the Hugo Award in 2002, and it is interesting that my 4 last books from rank number 7 to rank number 10 are all in consecutive years. All the books that I've discussed so far won the Hugo Award between 1999 and 2002. In American Gods, the main character is an ex-convict who deals with a number of people who turn out to be gods such as Odin. And the gods are weakened by the fact that modern people no longer believe in these gods, but rather believe in more vague gods, you could call them, such as technology, media, and so on. And so there is a war brewing between the old gods and these new gods, and so the main character is drawn into this war. This concept of gods being as powerful as humans make them to be by believing in them is not a new concept. It's also something that occurs in a book called Small Gods by Terry Pratchett. It's one of the books in the Discworld series. Neil Gaiman wrote a book together with Terry Pratchett, who wrote Small Gods, so it's maybe not a surprise that he got influenced by Terry Pratchett and some of his ideas. Now, Terry Pratchett's book is not the oldest example of this idea. Actually, the oldest example that I'm aware of is a Belgian book, which I happen to know because I'm Belgian Canadian, and that's a book called Malpertuis by Jean Rey, published in 1943. I believe the original was published in French. I read the Dutch version. There is an English version as well, but as far as I'm aware, it is out of print. This book might be known by some people because it wasn't made into a movie with Orson Welles as one of the actors. The movie was directed by Harry Kumel. It's a movie from 1971. This book was not ranked by Jim, but it is on his to read list. It's definitely a book I would recommend. I think it's a very good book. On number 6, I have Robert Heinlein with The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Now we're going way back in time. This book won the award in 1967. And you'll see there's quite a few books in the late 1960s and early 1970s that will appear in my list. This is not my favorite Heinlein book, but it's a very good book. I'm not going to discuss my favorite book here. Maybe in a later video I will have an opportunity to talk about that. It's a book that's actually quite funny at times, and Heinlein has quite a sense of humor, which is not always appreciated. Robert Heinlein sometimes has quite stark viewpoints. Some people would say extreme viewpoints. He's generally considered a right-wing person, and some people might have some difficulties with some of his ideas, but sometimes you need to take what he writes with a grain of salt because he has kind of a strange sense of humor, and that humor can sometimes fall flat because people don't always realize that he's actually joking. But in some of his books, it's a little more obvious that he's not taking himself too seriously. And if you haven't read any of these books, you might not get the wrong you might get the wrong idea when you read this one. So, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is a book about the moon that is used as a penal colony where the Earth sends their prisoners. And of course, the advantage of using the moon for that is if you've lived long enough on the moon and your body is too weak to go back to the Earth because you can no longer stand the Earth's gravity. Of course, people living on the moon, they do have children, and so many of the inhabitants of the moon are then not the prisoners themselves, but the offspring of the prisoners. So you get a very strange kind of society, and at some point this society rebels against the Earth. And I imagine that this is something that was probably inspired by the American Revolution. What's interesting about this book is that it has one of my favorite, probably the favorite of my Robert Heinlein characters, and that's Hazel Stone. This character shows up in other books like The Rolling Stones, which is a young adult novel, and in The Cat Who Walks Through Walls. In this book, Hazel Stone is a 12-year-old girl who takes part in this revolution. This book is not on Jim's top 10. He did have Stranger in a Strange Land on number 7, which I think is a good choice. It is definitely a very good book. And he plans to read Starship Troopers, which is more of a military science fiction book. It's not for everyone, but definitely an interesting book. I think this one can also be recommended. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, definitely a book that's worth reading. So who do we have on number 5? On number 5 we have, talking about military science fiction, we have someone who is known for military science fiction, and that is Larry Niven. This book, though, Ringworld, that won the award in 1971, is not military science fiction. It's more like a exploration novel. The idea of the book is there is a star system where the only object other than the star is a ring that goes all around the orbit of the sun. The ring is about 300 million kilometers in diameter and about 1.6 million kilometers wide. So it's a huge object, and it's rotating, so it creates an artificial gravity which pushes things to the outside from the inside. And so the inside of this ring is actually a habitat where people live and animals and plants live. And It's clear from the book that these people have been there for a long time because you kind of see speciation happening of different types of humans. So it's uh, as a concept, it's quite an amazing book. The scope is amazing. It is the first in a series of books, of I believe 4 books in total. Quite an interesting book. So on the one hand, it's about the exploration of this very strange world. On the other hand, the explorers are a group of humans and non-human aliens who have to work together. They're not friends of each other, strictly speaking, and in fact, they're more like enemies, but they have to get along to make fulfill this mission and make it successful because of other problems that are existing that are more important than their differences. So in that sense, it's also quite an interesting book. This book is not on Jim's radar. I would definitely recommend this book because it's quite an interesting one. On number 4, I have Arthur C. Clarke with Rendezvous with Rama, a book that won the Hugo Award in 1974. This book is kind of comparable to the previous one in the sense that it also about a habitat, an alien habitat. In this book, there is a asteroid-like object that is entering the solar system from interstellar space, and people observing this object notice that it has an abnormally irregular shape, and so they send out a spaceship, a manned spaceship, to go and explore it. The object is a cylinder. It's about 50 kilometers long and about 20 kilometers in diameter. And so the people on this spaceship, they go and explore and enter this habitat, and they find that it's rotating, which creates an artificial gravity. So people could, in principle, live in these objects, and they can find structures that look like cities. There's plants. There are robot type, like bionic robots, that come up and clean up whenever there's a problem, whenever there's a mess somewhere. And then eventually they have to leave after exploring this for a while because the object is about to leave the solar system, and of course they have to get out of there before if they want to get back to the Earth. So it's in that sense it's kind of an open-ended novel, and he filled that in decades later with sequels. I'm not a big fan of the sequels because it was co-written with Gentry Lee, and his style and narrative interests are quite different from Arthur C. Clarke's. Whereas Arthur C. Clarke is at his best in the original Rama novel. It's all about the exploration of this strange world. It's it's just fascinating to look at the imagination of this strange world. Whereas Gentry Lee has a tendency to turn the story into some kind of a soap opera, which I really don't like. And it's actually quite jarring to read these sequels because you can always tell who wrote which part. And when you switch from one author to the other, then it's as if all of a sudden you're reading a different novel. So you have these two people that were kind of side by side writing 2 different novels and then throwing everything together. I don't think it was very successful. I mean, it's interesting in its own right, so if somebody wants to read it, then go right ahead. But the overall did not make a great impression on me. But Rendezvous with Rama itself is an amazing book. It was not on Jem's radar at all, which kind of surprises me because Arthur C. Clarke is one of the greats in science fiction who definitely recommend people to read some of his novels. This is my personal favorite. There's others that won the Hugo Award, but that's my personal preference. So we're getting to the top 3. My number 3 book in the top 10 Hugo Award winning novels is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. That book won the Hugo Award in 1986. The book is about a young boy that is recruited to be trained in a military school in space with the objective of turning him into a commander that will lead a human fleet in a war against an alien species. So the book kind of follows this character, Ender Wiggin, who has to overcome a lot of difficulties in navigating this military school where all the other kids are much bigger, stronger, and more experienced than him. And he has to overcome that. But at the same time, he has to overcome an internal struggle because he's being trained to exterminate a sentient species, which causes him a lot of moral issues in and of itself. So this is a book that combines external strife with internal strife, and that makes it a really fascinating book. Now, the bizarre thing about this book is Orson Scott Card didn't actually want to write this book. He wanted to write the sequel, and the only reason he wrote Ender's Game is because he needed a backstory to make the sequel more believable. And it's probably just because that was the reason for writing this book that this book is better than any of his other books. Because I personally find Orson Scott Card to be rather preachy in his novels. And in this book, he didn't try to be preachy. There was no real, not, not a real message. I mean, there was a message in this book, but that was not the message he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about something else. He wanted to talk about a kind of a prophet who has a dark past and who has to live with that dark past as he is trying to improve the lives of other people. That was really what he wanted to talk about. And then the internal struggle of this prophet as a child going through the external struggle of navigating a military school and the internal struggle of having to exterminate a sentient species is actually a much more interesting one, but apparently not in his mind. This book ended up number 4 on Jim's top 10, so we're pretty much on the same page there. My number 2, we're almost at the top of our list, is Dan Simmons with Hyperion. That won the Hugo Award in 1990. Hyperion is quite an unusual book in the sense that it is a framing narrative, and it's often compared with the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, which is a medieval book. And the idea of this book, as well as of the Canterbury Tales, is that you have a group of pilgrims that each have their own reasons for doing a pilgrimage, and as they're going on the pilgrimage, they tell each other about their backstory. And this book, Hyperion, is exactly that. It's a group of pilgrims that are going to a remote planet, and while they're going there, they're telling their backstory. The reason they go to this particular planet is because there is a creature there, a kind of a sentient bionic robot that is guarding a structure called the Time Tombs, and it's not really clear until later in the series why he's there, what he's doing there, but sometimes this creature can provide closure in people's problems, and so people go on pilgrimage there to find closure for their own problems. However, it's a very dangerous mission because more often than not, this creature, which is called the Shrike, will actually torture the pilgrims to death rather than helping them out with their issues. So that's what creates the motivation to talk to each other and find out why they're all going on this very dangerous pilgrimage. I think it's a very powerful novel because of this unusual structure, and it's the beginning of a series of 4 books that they're all very fascinating. This book is on Jim's to read list, so it's not in his top 10, but it's a book that he intends to read. I definitely would encourage him to read it because it's a fascinating novel. Now, before I go to my number one, and many of you can probably guess what my number one is going to be, I'll give you a number of honorable mentions. First honorable mention is Kim Stanley Robinson with Blue Mars. Blue Mars is part three in a trilogy about the terraformation of Mars. And the reason why I like this one the best is because that's where the terraformation is the furthest, most advanced, and so it's starting to become more livable. So the trilogy starts with Red Mars, where we have a barren planet, followed by Green Mars, where you start having plant life on Mars, and then followed up by Blue Mars, which is a fully terraformed planet with water on it. It's hard sci-fi with a lot of science in it. I'm not always sure if the science really works because I've tried to do my own thinking and my own calculations based on the information he gives in the novels, and I don't always come to the same conclusion. So maybe it's me who's confused, but I think there's a couple of issues with the science behind the novels. So not in my top 10, but definitely worth a read. The next one is Anne Leckie with Ancillary Justice, which won the award in 2014. This book uh, is about a sentient robot which is trying to take revenge or seeking justice for the destruction of a spaceship that it was part of. And along the way, it meets another character that's kind of has aligned objectives. What makes this book unusual is that it doesn't distinguish between male and female, so sex and gender are completely absent in this book. It's not the first time somebody tried that. We have the example of Ursula Le Guin with The Left Hand of Darkness. And I feel that both of those books, Ancillary Justice and The Left Hand of Darkness, have kind of the same issue, is that this completely making abstraction of sex and gender, it doesn't really work. It feels a little contrived. So that's at least that's my interpretation. That's my opinion. You may disagree with me on that, and that's fine. Next, honorable mention is Clifford Simak, or, or Clifford Simak, with Way Station, which won the award in 1964. What I really like about this book is that it has quite a slow pace. It's set in rural United States, and science fiction books don't always have to be fast paced. I think a slow paced book can actually be very relaxing to read, and this is such a book. What is it about? It's about a person who is managing a interstellar way station. So he's receiving messages and spaceships from other stellar systems. Meanwhile, he's living on a farm, so he's pretend to be an ordinary farmer while he's doing this work. And so the issues that he's dealing with is, on the one hand, he has to hide his real activities with with this farm as a cover. And on the other hand, on the interstellar level, there is a war brewing. He has his own role to play in the diplomacy to try to avoid this interstellar war from happening. And then the fourth honorable mention is Philip Jose Farmer with To Our Scattered Bodies Go, which won in 1972. Now this is also quite an interesting book. It's a book. The idea of the book is that all humans who ever lived all of a sudden wake up on this strange artificial planet which has a river crisscrossing all over it, um, creating enough space for all of these people to live. And so there's a group of people that gather and they want to explore why they are there and what's where they are really. And so they just follow the river to see where it goes. It's kind of an interesting explorer's story. like some of the other books that I've talked about, say the Ring World, for instance, and Rama, are there's some similarity there. A lot of the book is really exploring what this strange and mysterious world looks like. It's the first part in a series. I have not read any of the sequels, and maybe I should, so that I can find out more about this book. Now, at this point, you may notice that there's one giant missing still. Well, there's more than one missing, but one of the ones that I would like to talk about right now is Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov is not in my top 10, actually, and it's just because I feel that his books, although they're great, they're not actually good enough to be in a top 10 of best science fiction novels. And I thought about why is it the case that I don't like any of the books enough to put them in the top 10. I remember when I was younger, I loved Isaac Asimov. I thought he was great. Rereading some of his books, I don't enjoy them as much as now as I did 20 or 30 years ago. And I think the reason for that is because of the characters. The characters are actually not that likable. Uh, a lot of a lot of the characters are kind of very argumentative. They're very opinionated. They tend to be rigid. So they all have the kind of the same personality, but they have different opinions. And then they're constantly bickering about these different opinions, and that is what drives the story. And when I was a opinionated young student, I loved these books because I could identify with these characters. Now that I'm older, I'm no longer identifying with these characters, and I'm not actually enjoying those books as much anymore. So that's why I don't have Isaac Asimov in this list. So, who is my number one? And many of you are probably already guessing what it is. That is Frank Herbert with Dune. And that book won the Hugo Award in 1966. It's hard to see how it could be anything else. This is definitely my favorite science fiction book of all. What is it about? It's about an aristocratic family that is sent to a desert planet called Dune to take over the exploitation of the planet from the arch nemesis of this family that is called the Harkonnens. This family, the Atreides family, arrives on the planet, and then their son, Paul Atreides, becomes kind of a messiah figure for the indigenous population of this planet, known as the Fremen. The reason why this planet is so important is because that's where the spice comes from, and the spice is a drug that allows people who have a certain sensitivity to this drug to predict the future. And the navigators of spaceships need this drug in order to safely navigate ships at velocities greater than the speed of light. So without this spice, the entire imperial system that has been built would fall apart. So there's a lot of intrigue and happening in this book. There's a betrayal. The Harkonnen family comes back, invades the planet, and then Paul, with the help of the native population, is now trying to regain the power of the family and establish his own power. What makes this book really interesting is that there's so many themes in there. There's ecology, there's politics, there's religion, there's philosophy, and so on. And I would say the main driver of the story, not just of this book but of the entire Dune series, is is really what happens when a person becomes a messiah. As soon as a person becomes a messiah and gets a following, a radical following, you get that this religion is going out of the control, and then this messiah can no longer control what he started. And essentially, much of the series is about how Paul Atreides and his successors tried to go back to a normal situation where you don't have these huge religious wars that have been instigated, kind of not on purpose, but it was a natural outcome from this religion that got an expression because this Messiah was there all of a sudden. So definitely the my favorite book of all, and therefore my number one in the Hugo Award winning novels. That's it. I hope you liked this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.